What is up, guys? It's Bo here again, and welcome to another Bo Ginger vlog. In this entry, I want to talk about language, right? I want to talk about language, because it is it is something that is so central to our lives, right? And of course, I'm talking about linguistics here. I'm talking about like oral language. There are many languages, but like the one that touches our lives the most is our spoken language, right? And it also carries with it the greatest pitfalls, let's just say, right? And of course I want to share with you like my realizations surrounding this area of this topic of language, and how I see the way that we kind of approach not only spoken language, but also the way that we communicate with one another, like change in the future, like towards if we are to reach a new paradigm where society is more collaborative and more kind of connected than competitive and segregated, then I think that we will see a shift in the way that we perceive language, and also the way that we communicate it, right? So so language, what is language really? Like how often do we ask that question? Because it's so ingrained, it's so kind of conjoined, you could say, with the way that we think. It's so kind of ingrained in our thinking, because it is essentially a direct representation of our logical thinking, of our thoughts. And that was exactly what it was meant to be. Language, of course, is symbolism. It is, they are, words are, the glyphs, you could say, the kind of symbols that represent the ideas that come forth from our intuition, from our consciousness, and it is how we make these thought forms flesh, right? So, so like, and it facilitates communication, because it provides a direct link between, the perceptions of one person and another, right? But the way that language once was, right, and the evolution of language really reflects also, of course, because as a representation of our consciousness, essentially, like, language reflects the way that our consciousness has evolved over time, right? Where language was once, like, it was once more kind of, it was once more symbolic, you could say. Like it was once more rooted, or rather, you could say that. Okay, so like it was, so obviously language was created as a servant to our consciousness, right? Because they was, we created this symbolic way, this symbolic system of communicating our consciousness and sharing our consciousness with other people. Words and language were once a servant to us, to our consciousness, right? And as such, we treated language with kind of like a very kind of fluid, like with a sense of fluidity, right? Because we knew, obviously, that language was a servant to our consciousness. We communicated with language what we felt, how we saw the world, what, and our experiences. And so, like, it didn't matter so much what, like, what exactly those words were pointing towards, right? And so, like, the way that we used language was way more kind of poetic and celebratory, if that makes sense. But, essentially, we once saw language as the servants of us, of our consciousness, of our thoughts, right? But throughout history, what has happened, along with humanity becoming way more cerebral, is that language started to take more and more of a center spot, right? It became more and more important relative to our own perceptions and our own experiences. Past, to a point where actually there was a turning point in history, and, I don't know exactly when that was, but I'm guessing it's in recent history, right? Where, humanity became more and more cerebral to the point where, like, in Stuart Pearce's words, he did an interview with Teal Swan, which I absolutely recommend you watch, because it's fascinating. It's about healing through sound and the importance of sound from both a spiritual and a practical context. But the word was crystallized. In the sense that, like, words became absolute. Words became fixtures that we had to adhere to. And subtly, what happened was that the roles were reversed, right? Where once words and language were our servants, we have now become the servants to the words, right? We must now adhere to the definitions, the strict definitions of words, right? And coincidentally, what I have been talking about in these entries is how we have become, servants to the way that we think, to, like, consensus and external definitions. This is reflected by the way that, we have become subservient to our language, right? And so, like, we're so obsessed nowadays with, like, the way that, like, what things mean, what exactly does this mean, how do we define this, and we get into, like, these amazing arguments that are, like, very, like, trivial over, in my opinion, over, like, the definition of words and how things should be defined, and, like, what does this mean. This gets us in so much trouble, because, like, we fight over such trivial matters as, the meanings behind words, where once, words and language were our servants. It didn't matter so much before, like, whether or not, like, two people use the same word to mean the same thing, because we knew that, like, the words were just a representation of how we felt. So, like, it didn't matter if two people used this, different words, as long as, like, they were coming at it from the same energy. And this also represents another portion of my teaching, which is sensitivity to energy, right? We have, over time, become less sensitive to our energy. And this is reflected by our language, right? We once communicated mostly energetically. Like, words were just kind of like the icing on the cake, right? Words were just, like, kind of like the extra stuff that we put on top to make it all nice and elegant, right? But now, obviously, they have become like, the governing bodies, as it were, to the way that we feel, right? And so it doesn't matter, and, like, because we're insensitive to energy, like, we don't know, we could be meaning the same thing, but we're using different words, and that is reason enough for us to fight over it, right? So this is very kind of, what's the word, like profound, but also subtle, I guess. Like, like, because it's something that kind of, like, was a bit, I was like, wow, when I became aware of this, I was like, wow, this is interesting. And how this applies, obviously, to real life is that when you start to have this understanding, you start to observe the way that you judge. I did an entry about judgment, but, like, the way that you judge what other people say, either, like, just in general, like, expressing their opinions, or, like, whatever thing that they say that is aimed towards you, right? And we get so, like, riled up over this, but, like, I recognized in myself that, like, the way that I express, even though I consider myself to be, like, fairly articulate, I'm not always articulate. Like there was a point in, there was a time when I was more insecure about my articulateness, but like, you know, but even then, like I recognize in myself that there are times when I say something and it may not necessarily represent fully what I mean. Another thing that you recognize with language is that, like, because it's so kind of heavily linked with the way that we process information logically, like, existence isn't always linear, right? There is always an else statement to life, you could say, right? You always have to talk in a roundabout way, just to scrape, over the outline of what you mean, like, intuitively, energetically, right? So, like, there is a lot of kind of like this and then that. Have you ever, like, for example, have you ever kind of like been in an argument with someone, or like witnessed an argument, like particularly online, right, where like there's one person holding one stance and then there's another person holding the other stance, right, and both stances are true at different points, right, looking in from different angles, like both people are right, but then like they both squabble over which one is right because like they're thinking in terms of linearity, right? But like the nature of existence is cyclical, which is another way of viewing it, right? Sometimes one thing is correct, sometimes the other thing is correct, right? In the winter, like the statement, I like wearing warm clothes is good, is true. But then when summer comes, the statement wearing warm clothes is false, right? And so, like, these differing perspectives that we hold. Again, perspective is multitudinous, right? The whole point of of this existence, even this physical existence, is like, this is like spiritual, like, kind of concepts, but like it is divine source fragmenting into all of these individual perspectives, which are all true given their point of reference, their point of view. But when we kind of collide is when we see the contrast between our perspectives, right? But strictly speaking, from a source perspective, from a higher perspective, all of these perspectives are true. They are contradictory, but from a higher perspective, they are complementary, right? And language, being, an artifact of our linear processing or analytical thought, like falls under it is inadequate in a sense, right? To kind of like to kind of resolve these complementary contradictions that we come across like very regularly in life. When you get to a point where you're aware of like the deeper paradox of life, right? Coming from like a thinking, a thought, an analytical paradigm, you could say. But if I, when like expressing myself, when talking to other people, are not entirely accurate in what I say, it is difficult to even to pinpoint what exactly I am trying to express. How is it any easier for someone else, right? And once you have this kind of a thinking, like, you start to realize that perhaps we don't need to take so seriously, or that's not even the right word. Like, we don't have to put so much weight onto what words are said, right? And this is another way of saying tap into your sensitivity, become more sensitive, right? Because when you become more sensitive, you realize it's the energetic exchange between people, and the thing that you project energetically forth, right? Which is, again, it's non-communicable. Like or rather, it's difficult to communicate fully in a linguistic sense, right? So you learn to not take what exact words are said with so much seriousness, with so much solemnity, right? Because it doesn't matter, right? A lot of the times, what a dedication to words does is that it destroys us, on on a health-based level, right? What I realized, is that like a lot of the times when I get caught up in the definition and in like what is said, someone else's opinion versus mine, is that I'm not taking care of myself enough, right? So this is an example of Einstein's saying, which is that Einstein's quote, which is that in order to solve a problem, we must go to a higher paradigm, or rather, we cannot solve a problem with the same level of thinking that we use to create it, right? This is an example of that, right? When we're fixated on definitions and on stances based on language, it's because we're not fulfilling ourselves. It's because we're not taking care of ourselves. It's because it's because we are in low vibration. We are in coping. We're in scarcity, right? And so like we very quickly, by taking care of ourselves, by fulfilling ourselves, by allowing the love within us, the joy within us to spring forth, right? Without judgment. The more that we do that, the more that we realize like it doesn't matter what exactly is said. It doesn't matter about the symbolism. The symbolism is only there to point, to embellish the essential experience, which is the way that we feel, the way that we perceive, like the way that we wish to express, that divinity that exists within us. The words only exist to embellish that, And so this is kind of a revolution in our consciousness, in the way that it affects everything. The way that we perceive, the way that we think about ourselves and the world and other people, the way that we communicate with other people, the way that we live our lives, the way that we structure our lifestyles, It's not about the definition. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about morality necessarily. It's about your experience. It's about your experience. That's all that really matters. Like, and again, like this is a revolution in consciousness, because it takes what is traditionally a very hard angled, absolute mental stance, where like if you say that this is true, it means that this is not true. No, like that is the kind of consciousness that we're evolving away from, right? So I'm going to do an entry after this about what's called consciousness, which is actually an entry that Teal Swan has done recently, which I thought was amazing. So I have to like do my own entry like surrounding that, because it also resonates with so much with what I'm teaching, what I'm experiencing, myself. But like, I'm not saying through this entry that like thinking is wrong or that language is wrong, because that is what traditionally, from that kind of like all consciousness, you could say, you would treat this kind of a statement. If you're saying this is right, that must mean that this is wrong now. Well, no, like again, like I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm saying that the focus is shifting. The priority, the weight that we give to these things is shifting. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying to put more faith, more weight onto our experiences, onto the way that we feel, onto our energetic sensitivity, and less on, the hard angled, like rigidly defined ideas and opinions and language that we use, right? And if we do this, again, it's not we must do this, it's if we do this. If we do this, we will find that life becomes more centered around love and joy and community and resonance, right? When we start to give back to energy, to energetic sensitivity, to energetic exchange, when we start to, dethrone, again, like, because I'm using spoken language right now to communicate, right? But like, what I'm saying is like, when we start to give energy back its its top spot where it belongs. The modality through which we communicate and resonate in our own experience, like the world becomes much more harmonious, right? We no longer need to fight and take stances and oppose so much anymore. We can do that for fun. Again, this is the amazing part of it, right? This is the magic. This is the divinity behind this revolution of consciousness. Is that we start to create a foundation of harmony for our experiences. We can still fight, but it's play fighting. It's not fighting that carries with it this crushing gravity of like life and death, of like of identity. Like I have to win and all of this stuff. Like this very fearful, chaotic like vibration that most of us carry within us. We no longer need to delve. We no longer need. That's the way that you express it. Like you don't need to do that anymore. You can do that for fun, but you don't need to, because we're all creating this harmonious experience that is going to be amazing if we allow it to transpire, right? To occur. So cool. So, that's just one aspect, but it's a very important aspect because, like I said, language is so kind of central to like the world essentially nowadays, right? And so it is important to address it. And yeah, and if we do address it, of course it's one part of this kind of revolution of consciousness that's occurring on planet Earth. But as long as everything goes well, again, not all of us will be alive for it. And that sounds very harsh, like it sounds like a very harsh thing to say, but I'm speaking, again, this is the disconnect, right? What I said was quite harsh just now. It's quite like a harsh reality, cold statement kind of thing. But I say it with all the love in my heart because I know that even if I myself am not alive for when this new paradigm comes about, I know that it will occur, and it fills me with such joy, and that is what will be the case for all of us if we just embrace this renaissance that's occurring right now. When we tap into our sensitivity, when we focus more on the experiential than the ideological, than the linguistic. That is, again, linguistic is awesome. Words are awesome. They're like a painting, they're like an art form. And when they become an art form, like they were back, in like, for example, old theatre and poetry, that is when we will transcend into the new paradigm, right? So cool. Bit of a waffly end, but like you get my point, right? I'm feeling good. You can see my energy, right? So cool. I hope that was insightful. I hope you'll take with this. Oh, okay. Well, I didn't quite hit like the kind of practical kind of punchline that I was aiming for in this entry, which was that when you talk to other people, like give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Recognizing yourself that like it's difficult for you, even if you are quite eloquent, to express exactly how you want, like, the thing that you want to express. Because like a lot of times we want to express something, but we don't necessarily want to hurt the feelings of the other person. Like, have you noticed that? That's something that's very, very common. Like, maybe like someone shows you something and you don't necessarily resonate with that thing. Like someone shows you a piece of music or like a piece of art or like a piece of literature, and like you don't necessarily resonate with it, and you want to express that opinion because it's your truth, but at the same time you don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, right? How often does that fucking happen, right? I still struggle with this a lot, right? But just recognize that you're not perfect in your expression, so, and they're not perfect in their expression, so like it doesn't matter so much what is being said. And ultimately, like, in a practical sense, like, you want to find people who understand this also. Because, like, you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you understand that, like, it's not so much, it doesn't matter so much what is being said or the opinion. As long as you guys love each other. As corny as that fucking sounds, right? As long as you love each other and you recognize each other as these divine projections, these divine vessels for, for God, essentially. You're these divine animatronics, these walking bodies with the divine spirit breathing through it, right? You can, but like if the other person doesn't recognize that, then like it's like it's going to be a tough situation, right? So let it be known to them, because like to be fair, like I don't always tell other people this. Like sometimes it's not comfortable, because it's like they receive it as like you are wrong, because they're coming at it with this like old mentality of like, you say this, therefore I am wrong, right? You're saying that I'm doing something wrong, so you're essentially saying that I'm wrong, and that's not the case, right? That's not the case at all with like this new kind of paradigm that we're approaching this with, right? So yeah, so give people the benefit of the doubt. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't matter so much what is said. Initially you will still feel that hurt, because you're still kind of like registering mentally what that other person is saying as the kind of like this affront to you. But like, just think about it. Like, well, if I can't communicate well, then maybe I should give this person the benefit of the doubt. And also, take care of yourself. Allow yourself. Like, that is perhaps more important, right? So regardless of what is said, regardless of what people think, regardless of their opinion, love them. Love yourself. Feed yourself well. I'm just giving practical examples now. Feed yourself well, exercise well, sleep well, engage in the things that make you happy, engage in the things that make you passionate, do the training that you want to do, that will make you the stronger person in your own way, right? So cool. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this entry up because it's quite long. So I hope that was insightful, and think about it, this is exciting times. I hope you're having a great day, and I will catch you guys in the next entry. Peace out. Yay!